Divorce lawyers have read it. What's the worst way you've seen someone screw over their spouse? Story 1. Not me, but a guy I worked with 10 years ago. I guess it counts as revenge. I worked with a guy who really stuck it to his ex-wife. When I met him, he was working in a sporting goods store making $8 an hour. He was not really like the other retail monkeys. He was older, well-groomed, well-spoken, clearly educated. One night after work, he gets into his car and I couldn't help but notice that it was a very, very nice newish Jaguar. I asked him how he could afford it and he explained it to me. He had been an SVP at a well-known Fortune 500 company, which I will not mention the name of, pulling in $300K with bonuses and stock options. He was married, but the marriage fell apart, and in the divorce, she demanded that she get the house and 40% of his wages. He and his lawyer somehow managed to get her to agree to let him keep the house in exchange for 75% of his pay. No dollar figure or employer specified, lol. As soon as she took the settlement, he quit his job and looked for a minimum wage job. He said to me that she gets 75% of nearly nothing now. He had other money stashed away, so he didn't even need the job, and he had the house and its equity as well. Also no kids, so there was no child support, just alimony. She was furious, of course, and she tried to resue him but failed at least once when she claimed that the settlement was not keeping her in the lifestyle she was accustomed to. He simply told the judge that the divorce was traumatic to him and he could no longer do his old job as a result. At least at that time, she did not manage to get out of the deal. Not sure how it all ended, but I thought it was brilliant, if not crazy-level spiteful. He was a good employee too, good with customers, showed up on time, no bullshit absenteeism or anything like that. He claimed he loved each payday because it reminded him how little she was getting. What a baller. Just curious though, why do anything at all? Isn't 75% of nothing less than 75% of minimum wage? Story 2. Not a lawyer, but when I was a kid, my parents got divorced. My mom met a guy on the internet and left my dad for him. My sisters and I were all teenagers, and being that my mom had never really been around, decided that we all wanted to live with him. We all had to write a letter stating our wishes, and it was understood that we would stay with him. My mom didn't even seem to care. Additionally, my dad had this retirement account from his old job. He wasn't rich at all and had worked his ass off for everything he'd ever had. When he got hurt in the job, he could have sued, but was promised that in exchange for him not suing, they'd keep him around. Instead, they canned him, and he left with about $100,000, I think, in a 401k type account that he'd been saving for nearly 30 years. Lastly, my dad had his house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath brick house that was all of about 800 square feet. It wasn't much at all, but my dad loved the place. My mom couldn't stand that house and wanted to move for as long as I could remember. That was another contentious subject that led to the divorce. He'd been paying on it forever, and when he left his old job, he took out a small chunk and paid it off. Anyway, their separation is progressing and it's understood we're living with him. She was so in love with this internet guy that she didn't care. He was in school halfway around the country and she was going to move there to be with him. We knew we'd get by just fine. They seemed amicable, and it was understood how this would all play out. The day in court finally comes, and instead of what we all assumed, even my dad's lawyer, she goes to the court with all these crazy claims. He was an abusive alcoholic, he beat us and my mom nightly. It was crazy and no one would be safe in his care. My mom got full custody. She got 50% of his house and 50% of his retirement account. My dad was stunned. That judgment would basically bankrupt him. In order for him to keep the house, he'd essentially have to clean out his retirement account and give her everything. The night of their divorce, I went over to see him. He was almost catatonic. He just stared off into space the entire time and would mumble whenever I asked him a question. I've never seen anyone like that, ever. My birthday was 2 days away, and I asked if he wanted to do something for my birthday, and he just answered with, "Your mom has full custody. I will if she allows me to see you." I asked if I could drive his old truck to school since I didn't yet have a car, and he just said no, that I needed to call my mom and have her pick me up, so that's what I did. And the next day in school, the day before my birthday, I'm sitting in our lunchroom and I hear, "Hey, isn't that your grandpa?" from a buddy of mine. I look over and see my grandpa and a cop making their way across the lunchroom toward me. They told me to grab my stuff, and in the office, I found my sister there as well. We rode home with them, where we were also met by my little sister, and that's where they told us that our dad ended it all, shortly after I left the previous night. To make matters worse, it all happened so quickly that nothing had been finalized. My mom dropped all of her paperwork and legally became a widow and got everything. House, retirement, and his insurance policy. She also got Social Security benefits for us, a fact we didn't find out until much later. She basically took all the money and moved across the country with her new man, leaving us to care for ourselves for the most part. And to this day, when asked about raising us, she'll spin the story of a young widow doing her best to raise 3 kids on her own. Story 3. Over here in the Netherlands, most legal costs are paid for by the government if your income is below a certain threshold. In practice, this means that if one of the spouses in a divorce has little to no income and the other one has a normal income, the one with the normal income will have to pay a lot of the process drags on. Considering there are plenty of ways to drag it on, I've seen cases approach ridiculous amounts of billable hours. There's a catch to this, however. Your lawyer is paid a set amount if he or she is paid by the government. However, should the money you receive after a divorce or settlement exceed a certain number, you are expected to pay your own lawyer, which is the reason we still keep track of the hours in these cases. So this one woman who thought she was screwing over her ex-husband by dragging the divorce over multiple years got a payout of an estimated £40,000 by the end of it. Unfortunately for her, she had to surrender most of that straight back in lawyer costs. There was a certain sense of justice in there. Also proves time and again that when there's conflict, the only true winners are usually the lawyers.
Hey there. If you haven't heard already, a few friends and I recently launched Rufus Rugs, your go-to destination for premium custom hand-tufted rugs. Looking to add a touch of your favorite anime like Naruto to your space? We've got you covered. Or perhaps you're a die-hard Pokemon guy and want bus toys showcased for everyone to admire. No matter your style, we can bring your vision to life. Click the first link in the description to explore more.
Story 4. Bad separation, wife filed a restraining order on the husband, very common. Wasn't a terrible guy, but not great either. A year into the divorce, his mother was dying. He asked his sister to speak with his ex-wife and asked to bring the kids to see her in the hospital before she died. The wife never did. Instead, she went to the court and said he violated the restraining order by trying to contact her. You can't contact someone through another party. He admitted it and explained the situation, but was found in breach of the order. His mother passed away while he was locked up and the wife never brought the kids to see her. Even for a not great guy, that's really low of his ex. Story 5. Story for my parents or lawyers. So throughout the divorce proceedings, there was a car that was a huge point of contention between the husband and wife. After months and months of saying he would never let the wife have the car, the husband concedes in exchange for something great, like one of their summer houses. It turns out he'd been driving the car for 3 hours every day in a big loop around the city, putting thousands and thousands of miles on it, basically making it worthless. The amount of planning and spite that went into that was amazing. Story 6. I did some consulting work for 2 divorce attorneys when I was in grad school. Their client was a career airline pilot. His wife worked part-time, so there was a huge income disparity. It was an ugly divorce. During the process, but before the final decree, tax time rolled around. The wife's attorney calls my guys and says, "Her accountant just called. If they can share their W-2s and file jointly, they each stand to save about $8,000 over married filing separately." My guys took that info to the husband. He says, "Screw her. Losing $8,000 is going to be way worse for her than it will be for me." Cold as ice, man. And that's $16,000 extra worth of government services for the rest of us. Hooray! Story 7. Dad was a real and Mom tried to save him a lot of money during the divorce. They have 3 kids who are 16, 13, and 8. Dad wouldn't sign any agreement my mom's lawyer produced. It had to be his idea from his lawyer or it wasn't getting signed. Dad's lawyer was incompetent and set an agreement that states he will pay $2,000 a month in child support until all kids are 18. Mom tried to explain to Dad that it needed to be revised to lower every time a child turned 18. Dad called Mom a witch during that negotiation, so Mom said, "Screw it," and signed the agreement, and Dad paid the $2,000 a month for 10 years when he should have been paying around $1,400 a month for 5 years and $700 a month for the last 5 years. Story 8. My dad basically appealed custody over and over, bringing in new friends to back his character. This forced my mom to seek a barrister or lawyer to defend herself. My dad was a massive problem gambler, had no permanent home, and was pretty at practical life stuff, nutrition, education, etc. This forced my mom to dig into all her savings to pay legal fees to keep a child anybody with a sound mind would know is much more capable than my dad. So in the end, my dad basically made my mother bankrupt trying to get custody over a child he wouldn't have been able to raise. Story 9. My dad actually got screwed by his divorce lawyer during my parents' divorce last year. My dad and my sister have never gotten along, and over the years it got more and more strained. They eventually got into a physical fight which led to a CPS report and him getting slapped with a child record. They labeled it as confirmed but isolated, so he's not in the registry and you can only see it with certain background checks. In this case, my mom was obviously going to get full custody of my sister. My mom also wanted to give my dad the house and his cars and his money pit of a boat. Lawyer decided, because my dad is stubborn as hell, that he would string old dad along. Lawyer spent hours with my dad trying to convince him that dad could get more money and custody from my mom. They did a divorce mediation, so they wouldn't have to go to court, and the lawyer dragged it out for 4 hours. The whole time he was riling my dad up, thinking he could get things like the original down payment in the house, have custody of my sister, my mom's car, etc. At the end of the 4 hours of mediation, lawyer told my dad he should take the deal that my mom and her lawyer had originally offered in the first place, and dad signed that. So he paid about $12,000 in completely unnecessary legal fees. It was awful to watch. Maybe I'm biased, but my mom's deal was super reasonable. He got to keep everything, and all she was trying to negotiate was half the equity in the house with a pretty reasonable amount of child support. My dad isn't a bad person at all, but this lawyer knew how to play his weaknesses and walked away with a stupid amount of money. Fortunately, my dad had legal insurance. $3,000 an hour. That's actually insane. I wouldn't have let that happen if it were me. Story 10. My stepdad has been divorced twice before. Both marriages had kids involved. First divorce was mutual and had shared custody of the kids. The second was because he was cheated on and also involved in shared custody of the kids. Wife number 1 lived out of state and kept no showing, forcing costly legal action every time he wanted to see his kid. Wife number 2 was initially supportive of him through this, until they had kids themselves and the cost became too much. Wife number 1 wanted him to give up legal rights to their kids, and after years and years of legal battles that nearly bankrupted them, wife number 2 basically gave him an ultimatum: give up the kids or get divorced. He knew that getting divorced from wife number 2 could result in him never seeing his other kids either, so eventually he was forced into giving up kid number 1. A few years later, wife number 2 cheats on him. They get divorced. Wife number 2 tells the kid it was him that cheated, but to never mention it to him in case he gets angry. Initially, they were splitting custody very evenly, but eventually wife number 2 figured out that she would get more money if she was technically the sole custodian, and he would see them on that basis because he loves his children. So to arrange for this to happen, she accused him of harassing their youngest child, then used that accusation to gain full custody before the charge was dropped due to the total lack of evidence. Then she tells the kids that he did harass them, again something he didn't know she told them for years. Upshot is that he was forced to give up his first kids permanently by one wife, and then the second wife had the rest of his kids think he was a cheater and predator, and thus be terrified of him and never truly love him, so she could save face and pick up a larger check. When the kids are older, they'll see her for what she is. This happens a lot. She'll regret it the same way you'll regret not leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, because you'll be less likely to see more of this stuff. So I suggest you do it now. Story 11. Split up due to my ex's mental health and my daughter, who is 1 year old, remained with me, with my ex seeing her twice a week. Ex has a breakdown and is sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I am told by social services not to allow her access unless it is supervised. A year goes by with my ex barely bothering to see our daughter, blaming me for this even though I always made her available within 24 hours of being asked to. Start of court case 1. My ex decides to accuse me of and domestic violence. This is eventually thrown out, and I agree to see my daughter once a week via the contact center to move on overnight, once she's 6 months clean and healthy. I was granted residence in primary care. This case lasted a year. 6 months later, ex is a new partner and is clean, mentally doing better, and decides to go for full custody. After over a year of my name being dragged through the mud and allegations of neglect to my daughter, etc., we reach an agreement to have almost shared care, 2 nights a week to the ex. I was again granted residence in primary care, this case with a bit over a year. Another 9 months go by and my ex decides to go for custody again, but this time accuses me of harassing my daughter. Luckily, since there had been 2 cases before this, there was a duty of proof required, and since it didn't happen, there was no proof. Went through a full hearing, very in-depth with psychiatric reviews, drug tests, questioning people spent time with, background checks to ensure everyone my daughter came into contact with was safe and above board, social services intervening all along the way. My stress levels through the roof all this time for the case to finally end with the same despising as before. 2 nights with ex, residence with me. We finished court 6 months ago, and since then, the ex has breached the order multiple times, refused to return my daughter after contact on at least 15 occasions over a 6-month period, not to mention not returning clothes and sending her home in small clothes and generally talking to me like I'm a piece of garbage, and refuses to accept that I am the resident parent. And people wonder why I have a fear of the opposite gender and being in a relationship. This nearly bankrupted me, destroyed all my savings, cost me my career, caused long-term stress and anxiety, and ruined my social standing. Ex told everyone about the things I did that were all made up, and they believed some of them. I cut contact with those who even remotely believed it, but those lost friendships, coupled with social services intervening when I met anyone new really, made it difficult for me to let anyone into my life. I'm now at a point in my life where I know court is over. I know my ex will always be more than a little difficult with me, and yet I still have to see her every fortnight for handovers and cannot move on with my life for fear of losing my daughter. I actually feel better for venting all this, even though it'll probably get buried. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but I met with a scummy one when I was looking to get a divorce. The first lawyer I met with, who had been recommended by a coworker as an amazing divorce attorney, suggested that if I wanted full custody, I should make sure people knew the relationship was a tell my friends or family, make sure the neighbors heard me screaming or begging him not to hit me, and document every bruise even if I wasn't sure it came from him. Thing is, my relationship wasn't like that, and I'd already told her that multiple times. She never outright said I should fabricate evidence or anything, but she ignored my repeated statements that there was none and kept on with her detailed instructions on how to document any maltreatment that might happen. I got the distinct impression that she was letting me know how to create a toxic relationship out of thin air in order to get custody of my kids. I ended up not using her as an attorney, for obvious reasons, and in the end, my ex and I shared 50-50 physical and legal custody of our children and raised them together. Despite whatever issues we had with each other, I can't help but wonder though, how many dads lost a relationship with their kids because of her zealous coaching? Story 13. My in-laws are mega into food and wine, as in they literally travel the world on food and wine tours, are part of clubs, etc. They told me about a nasty divorce where the husband was the wine aficionado, not the wife, but the wife was pissed off about getting divorced. The husband got all the wines in their extensive cellar, but before he was able to correct them, the wife soaked every bottle to remove all of the labels. So technically the wine was not damaged, but the husband had no way to know what he was drinking for aging and pairing purposes, which is a huge deal to wine drinkers. The other stories are just crude and violent. This one is a genius form of revenge. Story 14. Not a lawyer, but my two bosses were married and opened a bike shop together. He was the brains and the backbone since he was a former Olympic mechanic. She just sort of balanced the checkbook and worked a couple days a week. Unfortunately, he had no credit and she did, so when they opened, everything was in her name. All he wanted in the divorce was the bike shop and was willing to buy her half. She wanted the bike shop too, but didn't want to buy him out for his half. Mind you, her father passed away and she was sitting on like $300,000 in the bank and also had the audacity to take out student loans for her daughter to go to college. He lost the bike shop and I think he got a little bit of money for his share. What she didn't expect was that all the high-paying customers would stop going there. They were all his friends or they only wanted him to work on their bikes. So I don't know why she would have had that notion. So he opened up his own bike shop and all the regulars have become regulars at the new bike shop. Story 15. I worked at a law firm that was subpoenaed as a part of a divorce between a partner at the firm and a partner at another major law firm. The woman issued more than 70 subpoenas to banks, firms, investment companies, you name it, because she was convinced they had squirreled away $20+ million overseas behind her back. It got so bad that she dug up receipts from 25 years ago to try to put together this grand conspiracy puzzle. In the end, after she racked up $1.5 million in legal fees and 7 different lawyers, the judge said this is ridiculous. There was no conspiracy, and she wasn't entitled to a portion of this phantom $20 million. Mind you, this was a major law firm partner who was acting this way. She made millions per year in her career, but she apparently lost her mind. Maybe she lost her mind and there's no money, or maybe there is money and she lost her mind going for it. Either way, it sounds like a high-level screw-you revenge plan, or he was right to get out when he could. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy what's the most messed up way to get revenge. Story 4 was crazy. See you there.